Okay, let's just get right into it. The sprint backlog. Pretty much every agile team out there uses one. But here's the secret. Most teams just use it like a glorified to-do list. The top 1%, the elite teams, they use it as a strategic weapon. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how the pros do it step by step.
So, here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with what a sprint backlog really is. Then, we'll cover who actually owns it and how it's supposed to change during a sprint. After that, we'll get into the good stuff, the critical differences between good and great teams. And finally, we'll dive into the why, the mindset that unlocks truly peak performance.
All right, part one. What is this thing really? Let's cut through all the noise, all the different interpretations, and get to the absolute core truth. I want you to pause and think about your own team for a second. And be honest with yourself. When you look at your board, your Jira, your Azure DevOps, whatever, is it just a fancy checklist? Because if it is, I'm telling you, you are missing out on its real power. So this is it. This is the interview-grade answer, the one that gets you the job. The sprint backlog is not a list. It's a plan. And look at those keywords: developer-owned, continuously updated, adaptable. This thing is not a static document you write once and forget about. It's alive. And every single professional sprint backlog is made of these three parts, no exceptions. First, you've got the sprint goal. That's your why. Why are we even doing this sprint? Second, the selected product backlog items, or PBIs. That's the what we're going to build to achieve that goal. And finally, the plan. That's the detailed how, all the little tasks needed to get those PBIs done. Now listen up, because this is probably the most important and the most broken rule of them all. The sprint backlog belongs to the developers, exclusively. No one else gets to touch it. Not a project manager, not a stakeholder, and no, not even the product owner. It's their plan, period. So let's dig into that ownership piece a little more, because when you get this right, it creates a blueprint for success. Understanding who does what is absolutely key to making this work in the real world. This right here, this shows that separation of duties perfectly. The product owner, their job is to define the problem with really clear PBIs, but they absolutely cannot just shove more work in mid-sprint. The developers, they own the solution. They build a plan from scratch, and they update it every single day. And the Scrum Master, they're the coach, making sure the process is running smoothly and knocking down roadblocks, but never, ever telling the team how to do their work. So how does this all come together in sprint planning? Well, it's a pretty simple four-step flow. First, the sprint goal gets defined. That's the North Star. Then, based on that goal, the developers pull in the PBIs they're confident they can finish. Then, they break it all down and create their detailed plan. And only after all that is the sprint backlog considered done and ready for the sprint. Okay, now we're getting to one of the biggest misunderstandings in all of Scrum. The idea that the sprint backlog is set in stone once the sprint starts. It's not. It is a living, breathing plan. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? If you treat your sprint backlog like a contract, you're just setting your team up for failure. Think of it like a tactical plan in a battle. Tactics have to change when you learn new things about the battlefield. In fact, let me go a step farther. If your sprint backlog looks the exact same at the end of the day as it did that morning, something's probably wrong. Daily updates aren't a sign of bad planning. They are a sign of a healthy, smart team that's learning as they go. It's a feature, not a bug. So you might be asking what's fixed and what can change. Just think of it like this hierarchy. At the very top, the team's commitment, their promise, is to the why, the sprint goal. That's rock solid. Below that is the what, the specific PBIs. Those are negotiable with the product owner if the team discovers something new. And at the bottom is the how, the individual tasks. That's totally flexible. It should be changing constantly. All right, let's get super practical now. How do you actually take your team from just being good to being truly great? Well, it starts by spotting the common mistakes and then swapping them out with professional best practices. So here they are, the anti-patterns, the traps that so many average teams fall right into. You've got the product owner telling developers what tasks to do, trying to work without a clear sprint goal, having tasks that take days and days to finish, not updating the plan, and letting hidden work sneak in from the side. You know, do any of those sound a little too familiar? Now let's flip that on its head and look at what the world-class teams do. They keep their tasks tiny. You can get them done in less than a day. Every single piece of work is visible on the board. Every task traces back to a PBI, which traces back to the goal. Quality work like testing and code reviews, that's baked into the plan from day one, not an afterthought. And the second they hit a problem, they surface it immediately. So for our last section, let's zoom all the way out to the big picture. Because understanding the deep philosophy behind the sprint backlog, that's what really unlocks peak performance. It's what separates the masters from the apprentices. And this is the fundamental mindset shift. Scrum is built on something called empiricism, which is just a fancy way of saying knowledge comes from experience. The sprint backlog is the tool that lets us do that. It is a formal admission that our first plan is just our best guess, and we fully expect it to change as we learn. You know, the best analogy I've ever heard is a car's GPS. You don't just print out a map at the beginning of a road trip and then blindly follow it, ignoring traffic jams, accidents, and road closures, right? Of course not. You use a live navigation tool that adapts to reality in real time. The sprint backlog is that GPS for the complex, uncertain world of building great products. And when you get this right, the psychological impact on your team is just massive. It gives them focus, it builds their confidence because they have clear direction every single day. It helps them get into a state of flow, giving developers real ownership, real control over their plan. That builds momentum and engagement like you wouldn't believe. Clarity isn't just a nice to have, it literally makes everything faster. And that's really the bottom line, isn't it? This isn't about micromanagement or buying some fancy new tool. The huge performance gap between an average team and a world-class team, it almost always comes down to mastering these fundamentals. It's about using the sprint backlog not as a simple list, but as a dynamic, living plan for achieving a shared goal. That, right there, is a secret to high performance.